So I've always had a slight fascination with puzzle boxes. One morning while I was eating some breakfast cereal, I looked up at the box and immediately my mind started racing. Would it be possible that if you want to open the box, you have to navigate the lid through the maze? It's a kind of weird idea, and it took a little while for my brain to process this. My solution was a maze with concentric circles, and then I would draw a rectangle that would either be the cutout or the block. Then in order to make it easier, I broke it up into 12 segments like a clock. This gave me a little more structure for setting up the maze. At this point in the project, it was still only an idea. And the more I thought through it, the more confident I was this was going to work. Once I was satisfied with the results, it was time for phase 2. The way I envisioned this working was a pin would be guided through the maze vertically. Working through this, it was pretty tricky. In order to make it easier, I numbered each concentric ring. The odd numbers were the walls, and the even numbers were the path that you would guide the peg through. Layer after layer, I converted this maze to a vertical structure. Here you're seeing me do the maze on the outside of each layer, but I also did it on the inside of each layer off camera. I wasn't sure which one I was going to go with. Here's just a reference of what the individual layers look like. Remember how I said this was tricky? I got these offset and had to go back and fix these. So to get this started, I decided that each layer would be a 1/4 inch. Since this is a proof of concept, this would give me a little more wiggle room if I made mistakes. I decided on some white oak for the middle section. Now all I had to do was cut them to width and rip them to thickness. You've got to love the subtle ambience that these bring to the shop when they start blinking. When they're like, hey, you thought you were going to get away without emptying me today. Wrong. With the uneven floor in my shop, this thing is actually miserable to change. But let's get back on task. Here you can see the CNC cutting the layers. I decided to go with the maze on the inside, and I also added some holes for easy alignment with dowels. There were quite a bit of tabs to deal with on this. I broke the little scroll saw blade I had on the jigsaw doing something stupid, so here I'm using the oscillating tool for this. Next I used a trim bit to clean off the rest of the tabs here. There wasn't a lot of space, so I had to be real careful. Sanding the inside of these was going to be a little tricky. If I alter the inside shape too much, I run the risk of this project simply not working. So I try to keep it to a bare minimum. Good thing I labeled these before I completely cut these off. It was pretty tricky making sure I matched these exactly to the maze. This was simply for the test fit, and it had me more confident seeing this go together because I realized this was actually going to work.
Oh, that's cool. What? That is dope. Let's see if I can get this to focus, man. This looks so cool.
Now to cut the inside, which will actually wind up being attached to the bottom. Now it was time for a simple yet difficult glue up here. I say simple because it's really an easy glue up. You put glue around the rings and you glue them together. But the difficult part is when this is glued together, you're going to try to guide a pin through the maze on the inside. If you have a bunch of glue squeeze out inside the maze, it's going to be difficult to clean that glue out once it's dry. And if you don't clean it out, it may not work in that section. I kind of figured out the process that I was going to glue one piece on both sides, then stick another, glue one piece on both sides and stick another, and this really worked well. Once the glue dried, I really didn't know how I was going to sand this. I tried a couple different ways and it worked okay, but I kind of just had to wing it. The oscillating sander wasn't really high enough for this, so I had to keep rotating it top to bottom to make sure I got it pretty even. I was trying to figure out which of these look the best for the top, and I feel like these two right here are absolutely perfect, but we'll see. I needed to take extra care on this because these were actually going to be cut on both sides. So I needed to make sure I could remove it, flip it, put it back in the machine, and cut the other side. Since I was going to do this, I didn't want to use tabs, so I needed to flip it over, hence why I was using the double-sided tape. I chose a simple recessed pocket for the top and the bottom. That way it would give it a little more detail. Oh, and did I mention that I was going to inlay a picture of the maze on the top? That way the user could guide through by looking at the maze. This took a little extra work on my part. Behold the nub sander. Yeah, I wasn't really sure how to sand in this pocket, but this actually worked pretty well. I had to be careful because the maze pockets were just under 1/8 of an inch. My Onefinity cutting precision circles is kind of like that box of chocolates on Forrest Gump. You never know what you're going to get. Luckily, after the second iteration, it got closer. Since these were going to be in a pocket, I didn't inlay these like you normally would. I just used the double-sided tape, cleaned it off there, and glued it in the pockets. As a result of doing it this way, I couldn't put glue under these because any squeeze out would be impossible to clean. So my plan was to just put these in here and use really thin super glue to coat the whole thing. This wound up doing a really good job and I have no complaints on it. Since I had used a 1/4 inch bit to cut this out, I just added 1/4 inch shims and some screws to cut this pocket.
This cut is insanely important. This already has the inlay on the back of it. This needs to cut a pocket so that it will recess. Come on, Onefinity, you can do it. I'm really torn on how to do this, whether I should put some bevels so that it separates these more, or whether I should just kind of have them fit up flush against each other. I'm not sure which would look better, actually.
As you can see here, chamfers it is. I was nervous with this part and super careful. I am open to any suggestions how to make this easier. And for the record, I made this shirt just to wear at the 1-year anniversary of my first hater comment. But now, back to business. This is a very important detail right here. I'm figuring how far this pin needs to stick out and also how far it is from the top. If either one of these are off, this won't work. Here I needed to glue this up and keep it centered, so all I did was tape some blocks around it. That way I could use those for alignment. For this to run smoothly and not really have any wear and tear, I went with a typical 1/4-inch brass dowel on this. Now was the moment of truth, drilling this hole for the peg. The sad thing is this new drill press is quieter than my actual HVAC unit. I needed to take just a hair off of this so it would fit in the hole, so all I did was chuck it up and hit it with a little 220 sandpaper. I thought I was pretty careful with the gluing on this, but I still had some glue pop out on the inside. After thinking about how I could do this, I wound up just taking a cutting wheel and putting on the Dremel and kind of grinding it off. There wasn't much to remove, so this did pretty well. To round the end, I just chucked it up and hit it on a file. This is probably a pretty dumb way to do this, but it worked. This quick test was the moment of truth. Now it was time to do the final preparation stuff and glue these pieces together. There was a little bit of glue run out on the inside. The easiest way for me to sand this was put some sandpaper on a piece of PVC and just kind of roll this around and let it sand. There's got to be a better way to sand inside this. Even though there wasn't much to do, it still wasn't ideal. Because the whole outside of this was going to get finish on it, I went over this with some sandpaper and also hit it with some steel wool to rough it up.
Trying to figure out the perfect depth for this. I think it really doesn't need to go all the way back. Give it a little flexibility. I think that's probably the spot.
I almost feel like I should hold this pin with something. What could possibly go wrong?
Oh. Alright.
A common sense tweak, and this worked a whole lot better. Well, that time it worked. It really felt like the detail work on this was never going to be done. Here's me making sure that this is really smooth. I found a piece of scrap TIG welding rod to hold this in place while I smoothed it out. For the final hold on this, I'm using 3/32 brass rod to hold it in place. Here's the dilemma I'm facing on this. I kind of want to put lacquer on the inside because if I put polyurethane or something that I'd have to sand between coats, that would actually be horrible. But since lacquer partially dissolves the previous coat, that'll allow me to not have to sand on the inside. I don't want to just soak this thing with lacquer and risk it swelling up because there's a pretty tight tolerance on the inside of this. So my plan is to just tape everything off, then use a rattle can to spray it. In the end, I wound up putting about 4 coats on this. I did sand the inside lip just a little bit, but not too much.
So I kind of want a ledge right here to keep this thing from spinning. I just need a very thin piece of wood. Perfect.
A little CA glue and we have us a lip.
Here we go. Now we have to do, glue this to this, take that out of there. Using that for alignment, we're good to go.
We're quickly approaching the most important glue up of this whole project. This is a make or break moment right here. So the best thing to do is lose focus and glue this thing upside down. Come on.
What the f? See? Okay. Let's just do something super ignoramus. And that was it.
Sometimes you just have to make your projects way harder than they should be. I'll just blame it on the distraction that I talk about at the end of this video, so be sure to watch it to the end. Now to put some lacquer on the inside top. I probably should have done this before I glued it, but if I do end up making a really big puzzle box eventually, I'll remember that.
So I needed something that would fit down in here. Since I sprayed the inside with lacquer, the outside is going to be polyurethane. And this first piece I made that wasn't right is perfect for that. So I decided I wanted to put leather on the bottom of this, and I don't feel like cutting another piece or trying to figure out what the distance is. So I'm going to use the old trick of using a washer to offset that. So here's a washer with an 1/8 inch wall. And there we go. That actually fits pretty perfect.
There's legends of a puzzle box that was hidden and never found. In a recent discovery, it was thought that this map leads to the treasure's location. Through a storm that only seemed to rage as the adventurer was filming this, he pushed on. This was a really fun build, and it's kind of a quirky conversation piece. There's not a whole lot you would do with this, but if I eventually want to build a full puzzle box, something like this would be a piece of it. So in the comments, tell me what you liked about this project and what you would change. I have some really fun projects coming up after this, so if you made it this far in the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If it sounds like I'm breathing harder than usual, it's because I had a little event during this build. We have this young kitten named Dottie. We nicknamed her Naughty Dottie. I was about to walk through a door in the house and Naughty Dottie ran under my feet. The only way I could avoid stepping on her was shifting my body. When I shifted my body, I broke my nose on the door frame. Just straight up. No hands hit it, nothing. Just my nose. So, yeah, I've been battling that.